This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maliri and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview the brilliant Don Randal. Now, Don is a former police officer and has worked with a number of high-level organisations, the Bank of England, JP Morgan, and now he's a consultant and works with a number of people in the industry. Good morning, Don.
Hi, Paul. Pleasure to be with you.
Has that introduction hit every button? Have I got it right?
Yeah, just and the pro bono stuff and the partnership, but we'll talk about that.
That's brilliant. So, Don, where did it all begin for you, and what was your inspiration to join the police service?
Okay, that's a good question, Paul. We got to going back a few years, me a little bit more than you, but when I was 16, we didn't have career advisory people. It was just being introduced way back in 1966, and the Boy Scouts, Venture Scouts were a big thing, and my two Scoutmasters were policemen, and my brother-in-law at that time was a post office engineer. So I applied for the City Police Cadets, the Met Police Cadets, and to join the post office as it then was as an engineer. And I always remember, Paul, that I had an interview at London Bridge for the post office, and do you remember Norman Wisdom? He always had his sleeves were always too short, and I had this vision. I mean, when 16 in 1966 is not 16 in 2024, and I had this vision that the overalls wouldn't fit, and those sort of things have impact on you. And the City Police came back, and in fact, I joined the City Cadets in September '67 before the Met even replied. And one would say that not a lot's changed there in the production of police officers. I literally joined the City Police Cadets in September '67, primarily because Mickey Munn, John Avenell, both were originally City Police. John went off to the Met, and Michael stayed in the city, and I joined the City Cadets. I had an amazing 2 years. Amazing 2 years. You weren't quasi policemen. They were building your character, building your strength, just building you up, and we had a good time. In those days, cadets. I mean, I know cadets went in and out of fashion. But we went to the Pestalozzi village in Switzerland. We went to Croyde Bay on the summer camp, but it was quite brutal. I remember on the summer camp, Paul. You got no time off, yeah, and the two police constables. I'm trying to think of their names, like Bill King and Ron something. I can't remember his name, but you go, when's the spare time? They go, you get no spare time. They said the only chance we had spare time, Paul, we had to do an 18-mile run from Barnstable to Croyde Bay. Yeah, and so we did this in I don't know, if we did it in 3.5 hours. Yeah. So we got back, and they went, you caught a bus. We said, we haven't caught a bus. We've done this. They were, oh no, you've been cheating. So we did this quite fast run walk, yeah, to get an afternoon off. And they said we were cheating and didn't give us the afternoon off. But I mean, in discipline, and we did the Devizes to Westminster canoe race. Laurie Chadwick, who's sadly now no longer with us, Norman Russell, they won. We won in 1969. We won the Devizes Westminster canoe race junior. We were national lifeguard champions, and I couldn't swim very well, right? But I've always been quite broad-shouldered, so I was the real man, yeah? So I was a national lifeguard champion who actually couldn't swim that well. and they changed the rules after that. They changed the rules that you literally couldn't choose what position in the team you wanted, so you could be the swimmer or the real man. Not because of me, I might add, but just But yeah, fantastic time. Then I joined the City Force in December '69.
Wow. And because London was a completely different place then, wasn't it? I mean, it was the time of luncheon vouchers and city gents wearing bowler hats, and it was a completely different feeling. And dare I say, it was probably a lot dirtier than it is now, because you had all the after effects of the smogs and if you can visualise the buildings, which I can, even from being a child, they were filthy. I mean, London's a lot cleaner now. But what was that like, working in that square mile? Because you've got the Old Bailey, you've got all those fantastic monuments. What was that like for you?
Yeah, you're quite right. I think we used to call them pea supers, didn't we? And in those days, I mean, when I joined, Paul, radios were just becoming part of the equipment. And so, not the Metropolitan TARDIS boxes, but if you still go to the city, there's about 6 or 7 of the old police boxes. And if they wanted you, they used to flash the box, and then you go across and pick it up. They saw there's an alarm going off at 40 Cheapside. But you're quite right. In those days, there used to be a couple of static traffic points that were morning and evening. One was the statue down at the monument. One was Bank Junction. And there were times when you literally couldn't see beyond your arms, and you're meant to be directing traffic. It really was. It was smoggy, as you say. It was dirty, and the city was different. You say about the bowler hat. There was a commissioner, ex-Met Chief Superintendent, man called Jim Page. He used to wear a bowler hat. Yeah, that was as the commissioner used to wear a bowler hat. But it was different. But it was a time of evolution, if you think about it. In the early 70s. The economy was picking up a bit. The city effectively, weekends was nothing there at all. But I think I've been very lucky. I mean, I did my cadetship, and I did 25 years, and I was never bored. There's always something to do in the city. Even if people say, "Oh," but even if there's a lot of actual dedicated crime to the city, it all passes through the city. Yeah. At some point.
Absolutely. And of course, you're talking when you joined 24 years after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
So in history times, it's very, very close. So you would have been working with people that would have served on the battlefields. You would have had those people around you. The commissionaires, I always remember vividly the commissioners working in different buildings, all came from a military background. I don't even know if they exist anymore.
They do. The corps security do exist.
Do they really?
Yeah, CORPS, yep. And a good friend of mine, Mike Bluestone, is still a executive director there. Yeah, they're actually over £100 million business now.
Are they really?
They are, yeah.
And they're very, very, very proud, very smart, and their standards, which is what we stand for, is everything. That absolutely matters.
And their dress uniform is exactly the same, by the way.
Is it really?
Yeah. I mean, their dress uniform. I was at a function for Chartered Security Professional. I'm the founder of that. And we said thank you to the assessors and the team, and we held it at the core building just off was it Cursitor Street, just by Farringdon Station. And one of the guys there, who is a Chartered Security Professional but also an ex military person, he was in their dress uniform. And if you go back to that period, they look like they did then in their dress uniform.
Fantastic. And it's that vibe. I still love going into the city, and I'm in there on a regular basis, as you know. But I still like the vibe, but it has changed over the years. So where were you stationed when you first started in the city? Where was your first permanent posting?
Yeah, actually, where I spent most of my career, funny enough, I was at Wood Street. I think my collar number was 713D. And my warrant number, because you'll still remember your warrant number, mine was 10710. Yeah. And you would know yours as well. So I, as a police constable, I was at Wood Street. Then I went on the motorbikes. Everybody, if they want to chastise a detective, they always remember that one year you rode a motorbike. Yeah. But I rode a motorbike because I wanted to be first on scene at everything. I wanted, my mum taught me before. You've heard me talk before. My mum's always did teach me that if someone pays you money, you do the best of your ability. The fact that your ability may not be as good as your ability, Paul, doesn't matter as long as you put the time, effort, and energy in.
Yeah.
So then when I was on that was at Wood Street. So I spent a lot, because when I was running the fraud squad 88 to 93, that was at Wood Street as well. So I did a short spell at Bishopsgate, and I was a DS at Snow Hill, which is right opposite the Old Bailey, as you know.
Yeah, which I think is closed, isn't it now, Snow Hill?
It is. Well, they're all closed. I mean, they're all closed. The only one that remains open is Bishopsgate, and that's soon to close.
Is it really?
And they're just opening a new complex in Fetter Lane by Fleet Street.
Oh, okay. So the early 70s, we're talking about a time of the IRA were running around the City of London, which was a massive issue. The bombs going off, the Old Bailey bomb. Were you involved in any of those incidents?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, before we started this, when we were chatting, I talked to you about my friend Colin. So myself and a guy called Brian Renault, we were first on scene at the tower bombing in, I think, 72, the White Tower. We were just about to, I remember exactly where we were. I was on the motorbikes at the time, We were just at the back of Bishopsgate, just I think whatever we were doing, just getting ready to sign off. And the call came out, and Brian and I, we were first on scene at the tower bombing, where I think her name was Dorothy Houseman, was the only fatality, but there were a lot of New Zealand kids who were injured there. And it was brand new to us. We weren't familiar to secondary devices. In fact, we weren't familiar it was the first mainland Irish attack, if you recall.
Yeah.
And I was second on scene at the Old Bailey. And my friend Colin Thornborough, who I was talking about earlier, he was first on scene. He was a PC at Snow Hill at the time, and so yeah, and we lived through that period of, we weren't used to it. We had to learn new tactics, and the intelligence networks weren't what they are today. It was brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. I interviewed Mick Thwaites. I don't know if you remember Mick, but he was a cadet in the city at the time, and he went when he left the city. He travelled around the world in a VW camper, but that's another story. But yeah, he was talking about it, and of course you had the Moorgate Tube disaster, which would have been on your page. So all these things happen because people don't realise, and as you quite rightly say, at the weekends it used to be quiet. It's now a lot busier, but the influx of people into that square mile is and was overwhelming, wasn't it? It was just full on from 6 o'clock in the morning until late in the evening.
Yeah, I mean, going back, yeah, and in fact, I was, the Moorgate Tube disaster, I was on night, so I actually manned what we then called the Casualty Bureau, and I think it's still called the Casualty Bureau, but it was a card system, it wasn't electronic, very sad. But yeah, and then we still had like dedicated, at Cannon Street Railway Station, there was a dedicated point to see the pedestrians across the road to get them to work. And, in those days, Paul, from a uniform point of view, it was to keep the traffic moving. I mean, that was it, keep the traffic moving, keep that, whereas no one cares about traffic today. But that was the sole objective, keep the traffic moving. But yeah, the city, and then we had the Marchioness disaster, we had the Cannon Street rail crash. So, when you look at that 1 square mile, and then, when we, in a moment, I guess we'll jump forward 20 years, and then we look at the second phase of international terrorism. But when you look at that 1 square mile, there isn't much that's happened. Everybody thinks about economic crime and the fraud side, but you say, we had all the various devices. We had the Tower of London, Old Bailey, we had the Moorgate Tube disaster, the Marchioness, the Cannon Street rail crash. I mean, an awful lot for 1 square mile of our country.
Absolutely. And of course, the other issues, Operation Countryman, which was part and parcel of the history of the police service. Did you have any knowledge of that? Were you working with those people at that time?
I was at the tail end of that. In fact, I think you know this, and Peter Marshall was the city commissioner at that moment in time, the tail end, and Robert Mark was obviously the Met commissioner who basically caused that to happen. And Peter took me, I think the first one was Jerry Squires, the second one was Dick Keating, and I was the third uniform sergeant to go direct in as detective sergeant. And I always remember Peter saying to me, he said, I want you to go to Snow Hill. I want a new ethos. I want a new ethic of investigation. You're not involved in the history. You're not there to investigate the history. And he said a phrase which some people might find slightly offensive, but he said two things. He said, one is that there still are, and there always will be, corrupt police officers. You can never rid corruption out of policing anywhere in the world. He also said another thing. He said, the disappointing thing is corrupt detectives are actually good detectives. They're just corrupt, and they've got amazing detective skills, but they decide to put that little twist on. So when I went to Snow Hill was to actually, be a part of it. Well, Dick was there before me, and then I went, and then you got a series and a change of working practice, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was so much impact on the British police service, and even now, it still rankles on, doesn't it? Those individuals that let us down. And you're right. Some of them that I worked with who got in a lot of trouble were brilliant detectives, but they always pushed the boundaries, and they went the wrong side of it.
Yeah, and it's also I've always, Paul, I know I sometimes overcomplicate things, but majority of times I try and oversimplify things. But I've always said with crime, there's three principal motivations for crime: need, greed, and others. Yeah, there's those who basically just they haven't got it. They've got to put food on the table, so they go into crime. There's others that are just greedy. Yeah, and we've seen a lot of those over the years in organised crime and the gangs. And then there's the others who just basically are criminals. That's the way they're built.
Yeah.
But there was a time in that early 70s where people couldn't afford to come to work. And you remember the old red driving license, someone would get stopped and the person would get a red driving license, that would be £5 in it. Well, £5 was more than they were earning a week. I remember when I joined, and when you joined, my salary was £1,000 a year.
Wow, yeah.
But there were people who had to go sick because they couldn't afford to come to work.
Absolutely. And but that's a modern phenomenon as well. Even I've been retired 8 years this December, but I had a PC that worked for me over at Harlow who was exactly that. And we used to we were monitoring sickness in a different way then. And you could see that there was a pattern. They'd go sick 3 or 4 days before payday. And when you asked him, it's, well, because I'm travelling from Colchester to Harlow and I can't afford it.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of life.
Yeah, you used to have people, as you know, the city police, a lot of Southend city people join the city police. And but they'd come to work in one car, down the garage, have 5 of them in a big old Wolsey coming. And that's the only way they could afford to get to work was to car share.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a magnet, and it still is a magnet for external forces. What was your motivation to get promoted? Were you supported in that, or was that something that you did off your own back?
No, I wasn't supported. It goes back to that original work ethic thing. I just worked hard, yeah. And that's a very good question. And maybe if I can accelerate it forward to when I got appointed superintendent, tech superintendent, and I remember Bill Taylor, who was then the assistant commissioner, and Bill Taylor, Hugh Moore, and Owen was the commissioner. And after it, when I got the appointed, Bill said, "You weren't the best, but you're the hardest working," and that has always been my ethos through my life. Yeah, go back to mum. Yeah, and it didn't. I mean, you've got to have a certain standard of ability, but application. So, interesting when we talk later about why I left. The same principle applies. So I've never been strongly academic in my background, and it was just self-motivation really. And I remember when I went from DI to DCI, I think Owen was assistant commissioner then, and it's quite funny. And I wanted to go to Barkingside on the RCS, which perhaps in hindsight I'm pleased I didn't. But his PA rings me up. Rosemary rang up and said, "Oh, Mr. Kelly, I'd like to speak to you." And I remember exactly where I was on the 9th floor in Wood Street. And he said, "Oh, Don," he said, "I know you want to go to RCS at Barkingside." I said, "Yes, I'd like to do that." He goes, "Well, I'm sorry, you're not going to do it." Okay. He said, "But we'll promote you DCI from the 18th of January and you'll stay in the fraud squad. Is that okay?" And I went, as you do emotionally, Paul, I went, "Yeah, that's great." And put the phone down. And I thought, I wonder if he wanted to say something else. Yeah. So I rang Rosemary back. I said, "Rosemary," I said, "I think I just cut the assistant commissioner off with sort of a little bit of excitement." And a few minutes later, came back. She goes, "Don," he said, "have a nice afternoon." It's yeah. But it really, even today, it's hard work and application, isn't it? Yeah. And that's been my motivation. And did I have a couple of mentors? Yeah. Tim Hillier was a great supporter of me. Peter Marshall was a big supporter. Owen was. I had some people who liked what I did. I think we all have that, but self-motivation, Paul.
And I get it. Where were you born? Where were you brought up? I mean, you spoke about your educational side, but what's your...
Dartford, Kent. 11th of December 1950. I was a war baby. Yeah. I talk quite openly about this. My biological father left me when I was about a week old, I think. And yeah, so I stayed in Dartford with mum stayed in, well, mum effectively died in the council house that I was born in Westhill Hospital. Um, yeah, and my mum was a Doer Scot. Yeah, came down, one of 14 children, I think, from Kinnaird Castle in Dundee. Came down in 1920. Mum would be in her 90s now, easy. Came down in 1926, worked in Woolwich Arsenal on the Second World War, making ammunitions, as a lot of the females did in that period of time. Um, Regrettably, when the second husband was not a nice man. Um, yeah, and I stayed in Dartford, and actually, yeah, I stayed in Dartford. I moved to across. Do you remember the old rent aid? Remember
Yeah.
the rent aid? I don't know. You're that much younger than me, but
Something I know of. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but way back then, it was based on the rateable value of your house. Yeah,
Yeah.
and Dartford was the lowest rateable value in the country, right? and so you build an extension. You bring up the council and say, "Oh, I just built a glass extension on my house." They go, "You're a policeman." And how do you know that? It said the only people who ever tell us about putting extensions on their house and increasing their rate of value are policemen. And hypothetically, if the rent what I got in Dartford, I know, let's say it was £100 a month, hypothetically, moving across to Chigwell in Essex,
Yeah.
my rent aid went from £100 to £300. And the house price difference was like £2,000. I think I bought the place in Chigwell for 16,000. I bought the place in Dartford for 12. I mean, talking a long time ago. So, yeah, but that was one of the anomalies of British policing, and that's why I moved to Chigwell
Yeah.
in 1976.
Right, because it changed in '94, didn't it? No, actually, I got housing allowance. I didn't get rent allowance, so because I didn't anyway. So you went to Chigwell in '76.
Yeah.
And Dartford, the home of Mick Jagger, the Mick Jagger Centre.
He went to Dartford Grammar, actually, which is just, I was at Dartford West Secondary Modern. And actually Tim Hillier, Chief Superintendent, he's retired now, Tim, sometime. Actually ended up being a magistrate in Amersham. But Tim was also at Dartford West Secondary Modern.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And I'm nosy, so if I'm asking too many questions, you just say, but
I'm comfortable.
It's brilliant. So you're in the City of London, and networking is a massive part of what you do, isn't it? I mean, you're a great raconteur, but you're also a fantastic networker. And I think I met you in the Australian High Commission about 20 years ago. I was going out to Perth on a rape inquiry. And thankfully to you, I got to meet, great people like Ken Stewart and so on and so forth. But you've got to the point in your service, you've done lots of different things where you think, well, do you know what, I'm going to make a change. What was that catalyst? What was the thing that made Don Randal say, do you know what, I've done all the things I want to do. I've worked on some of the biggest frauds in history. What made you make the jump?
Yeah, it's quite interesting you say about the Australian Embassy, because do you remember Chris McDevitt?
I still keep in touch with Chris Lyons, but yes, I do. I remember Chris McDevitt very well.
Chris. Yeah, sorry.
No. He came and stayed. He came and stayed here with my wife. He came and stayed here with his wife.
Yeah. Well, Chris and Di are here next week.
Are they really?
I'm having lunch with them and Ken on Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, please send them my regards.
I will, yeah, because there was at that era when there was they've always been. I mean, the interesting. I always think I've got massive respect for the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, because from a global perspective, they put good people around the world. They put quality. You get the occasional blip, but they put quality detectives as their liaison officers. And I've got one when I was working in Beirut, particularly exceptional guy, and McDevitt, Chris and Di are here next week. Paul Morris, were really, really good people, and so that's one thing. So the thing that when I got made detective superintendent, and there was only two of us, there was John Todd and myself. Toddy went to the SFO, and I was the operational lead for the city for 5 years, and I was also the vetting officer to the SFO. So basically, I wasn't going to work at the SFO, but we can talk about that another time. I don't disagree with the principle. It's just a bit too slow for me. Yeah. So I had a fantastic time, travelled the world, promoted, voted City London Police, and people like Bracken, Nick, he would say, we saved the city police at that time because we put fraud back on the map. We investigated it vigorously, and we made a few errors, but fundamentally we brought the city police back into fore. And then, of course, I went back in, as I used to do, flip me back in uniform every few years. So I went back as Superintendent Ops 10 days before Samariax bomb, and then I was Superintendent Ops, and we theorised the internal evacuation for the Bishopsgate bomb. And as you know, you've heard my Paul Reed podcast with your cousin, so basically come 94, 95, I'd run the fraud squad operationally with good people around us, both above and below. Bishopsgate bombs, created national. And JP Morgan have been, interesting enough, Paul, JP Morgan have been chasing me for about 3 years. They had an investigation involving JP Morgan. A wonderful man called Ted Ferrace came over and said, I'm not leaving. But do you remember that period? And I forget where you were at that time, but if you wanted to be a chief police officer, that you had to have at least one, if not two, master's degrees. And I remember Bill saying to me, there are probably 3 forces in the country will take you as ACC ops. And no disrespect, I think Norfolk and Suffolk and Essex and Cambridge are all great forces, but it really inspire me. And I wanted to do something else. Basically, I had a great policing career. I didn't move because of money, which people always think you do. You go private sector. I basically, do you remember that also there was that period where there were no chief superintendents? They did away with the chief superintendent rank. So, and there were 6 of us running the city police, the 3 ACPO and 6 superintendents. And so all I did was effectively the chief superintendents were just coming back in as I left in January 95, and I just moved across for the same salary. But interestingly, another little quirk that your listeners might like. I mean, pensions then at superintendent, I remember vividly, I was paying £434 a month pension. So going to JP Morgan, I was £434 better off because it was a non-contributory pension. So already, and it was just time to leave. And but the networking and partnership I'd always done in the fraud, I'd always, I've always, we've had turbulent and good times with the media, Paul. But I've always, my good friend Tony Hetherington still writes in the Mail on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I found that bridge with the media, an acceptable professional bridge, and that networking. So JP Morgan was still wanting me. So I can remember standing at Leytonstone Station, because in the city, Paul, if you leave at 25, it was pre Windsor, and the pensions were the old-fashioned pensions. If you leave at 25, you get a big hit because, as you know, the last 2 to 3 years is where the figures go up, but it's deferred to your 50, not to your 60. So although a superintendent's pension actually related to a sergeant's pension because of that 5 years, at least there was something on the horizon. But there was no going back then, Paul. Not like today where you get that 5-year window you can go back. I mean, you're out there, they filled your post before you leave, It's there was, I think the only person who ever went back was a guy called Ken Farrow. But and I remember walking down Victoria Embankment on the 16th of January 1995, like a little schoolboy, right? Like I had my little case, my pencil case and my notebook. And I thought, it never crossed my mind, Paul, what if they don't like me? What if I don't like them? And it was a new era. And you've got no longer a warrant card. You're just a member of JP Morgan. Yeah. So I think, to answer your question, a combination of reasons. One is I'd had a great career, really enjoyed it. Had an opportunity to stay in the City of London, JP Morgan 60 Victoria Embankment. And I didn't like that horizon for chief officers, and in fullness of time, it's been proven wasn't a good idea. If you remember, there was that period in that late 90s, early 2000s, where a lot of people didn't actually make it. They promoted the wrong people. It's a bit of a broad statement, but if you do the analysis, I'm not far wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And JP Morgan, I mean, you spoke of your international travel, but they are a world brand, aren't they? They are a global brand, JP Morgan. So you'd be hard pushed to find a better person or better team to go and work with. What was that like, though? What was their acceptance of you when you walked through that door?
They wanted me. There was a little bit of, because effectively I was taking someone else's place, because Ted Ferrace had a vision for bigger. Yeah. So there was a little, there was a few months was a bit sticky, because, you know, you've been in the city like a sort of semi-god, and I turned up and I've got like a desk, an open plan desk, and one box file and a phone. And the person I was going to succeed, he came out, and so at the top of the house, I did 12 interviews, Paul, right? I did 6 professional interviews and 6 do we like you interviews. So, you know, you have the professional interviews where they're looking at quality and what you're going to bring. But the 6 personal interviews at JP, head of audit, head of HR, CEO, COO, head of legal, they had a right of veto. So if one of them said, can't work with him, you're out. Yeah. So no matter if you got through the professional, you used to have the 6 personal. But so this guy comes out, it doesn't matter who he was, and he throws this sort of letter on my desk. He goes, you can deal with that. Okay. And JP Morgan that time had an office block in the centre of Stratford, in that high rise there. Yeah. And it was a crime prevention survey of the car park at Stratford. Yeah. So I've gone from up here to go and doing a survey of a car park. I went, okay. I said, okay, all right. I just disappeared off. And I came back to the office about 7 o'clock that night. Everybody's gone. And I ring New York. I said, I'm out of here. I said, I'm not doing this. And the guy goes, oh, no, please wait, calm down. And he said, is your back still bad? I said, yeah, it is bad. He said, go and have the operation. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's only going to be 2 months. I know they're treating you badly, this person. He said, but go and have the operation. He said, it'll all work out. It'll all work out. And the truth of it was, because, you know, I went there. I started off, where was I? In a non-conceded way, Paul. Started off doing a car park prevention survey in Stratford. And when I left in 2008, I was International Director of Security Responsibility for 2/3 of the world, everything outside of America, business continuity, risk, money laundering, the whole 9 yards. So in 13 years. So, you know, I'm pleased I got over that little hiccup. But at the top of the house, really, they wanted you. But the only thing they said, and this is perhaps for people in the future, said, called me up one time, and there were 2 instances, Paul, if you want me to talk about. One was they called me up and said, look, you know, we really, you know, when anybody starts off saying, we really respect what you're doing, Don, you know, there's a kick in the tail going to come. And I remember Derek saying to me, he said, I said, okay, where's the kick, Derek? He goes, but we want you to be a businessman as well as a policeman. So, okay, I get that. He said, you know, and, you know, even today, Angie, my wife, would say that, you know, you look like one, you talk like one, you still are one, even though you left 25 years ago. Yeah. And he said, how long will it take you to do that? I looked at what, I said, at 1 minute, 30 seconds, Derek. He said, you serious? I said, yeah, I get it. You want me to be a business person with policing skills? Absolutely. And the other one was HR. You know, one of the secrets of being successful in private security, and you know this, is that you've got to understand HR, because you know they get all the difficult issues, and they're powerful, and the executive assistants, because they have access to the top of the house, and when we need access to the top of the house in times of trauma and stress and anxiety. So HR wanted to see me. I couldn't find out what it was about. Just couldn't, but it was not urgent, right? And you talk about the networking, and people will talk about my lunches and my dinners, but so eventually I sit down with the head of HR, and he's awkward. He's really awkward. We're senior detectives, Paul, right? And so I said, Malcolm, I said, should we sit a mythical person opposite me, and you tell that person what you want to ask me, and I'll answer him, and that makes it easier for you. He goes, oh, you're a bit strange sometimes, Don. I said, what's the problem, Malcolm? He goes, it's the lunches. I said, yeah, okay. He said, no. He said, we know the benefit, but you know, and we had a very fine wine cellar at JP Morgan in those days, and he said they seem to be getting a little bit more frequent, and a little bit more obvious. It's okay. I said, well, stop them then. He goes, no, 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 we don't want you to stop. I said, no, no, I'm not going to stop them. I'm going to move them, and we'll have dinners. Yeah. And there'll be more of them, but you'll never see them. Are we okay with that? And then the JP Morgan dinners became quite famous. In fact, people would say, have you not been to dinner at JP Morgan? It's and so everybody's happy.
I was just about to say, I vividly remember Paul Morris going back to Australia, and you called a dinner, and I was invited, and I was still a DC then. It's before, so some time ago, and there was Alfie Hitchcock. I mean, the lovely Alfred Hitchcock, Stevenson. It was the great and the good. Ken was there. Everyone was there. Frank Armstrong, and they were all senior officers. They were up there, weren't they? And there I was, DC Paul Mallory, and it was absolutely fantastic. Brilliant dinner and great hospitality. But I will take that with me. And the other one was the Chinese.
The Ming Court.
The Ming Court, yeah. But yeah, it was superb. How do you think your former college, because you were really up there. You are really up there. Within, but of course, there would still be people serving in the City of London that had worked with you. Did you ever experience any green eye, any reticence around your success?
Yeah, I think in the early days, it's a question I'm quite happy to answer for. In the early days, I think people, they were they envious, or they just, the trouble with the job is they'll always find a reason to criticise, won't they? And sometimes when you mingle, they challenge your motivation, but the motivation is innocent. JP Morgan is very self-sufficient. I don't think it was. Well, there's never been a time where we've asked for anything that we shouldn't ask for. Yeah, that was the rule. When people came and joined me, I said we do nothing we are not allowed to do. Yep, that's it. That's the rules. We support law enforcement. We work with law enforcement, and we give more than we ever seek to take. And we always did that. And I did that both at the Bank of England and JP Morgan. I think even to this day, Paul, people say, why do you do it? What's his motivation for doing it? We might talk about the Violence Against Women and Girls initiative, which I'm doing at the moment. But even, people, they go, oh, he left at 25 years. Even 25 years later, they still say he left at 25 years, sort of making an innuendo that he had to leave, which I didn't have to leave. But I think actually a former city commissioner, I had a chat a few months ago, and he said to me in a soft moment, he said, when I first came to the force, I didn't like you. Yeah. I said, we made that pretty obvious, He said, but I'd never seen it before. He said, I didn't understand. Bear in mind, I spent 6 years on the police authority as well, the police committee. He said, I'd never seen a person who'd left 15 years ago could have so much, not influence, but so much engagement with the force. He said, and it was alien to me. And he said, for that reason, I'd never seen it, I'd never experienced it, and therefore I didn't particularly like it. He said, and bear in mind, I've always got on very well with all the commissioners, and I've never sought to abuse that. I've always sought to add value, and that was a very honest statement by him at that time. And he just said, but now I understand it now. Yeah, he said, but when you look at partnership around the country, Paul, there's not many people partner like you and I do, and like the city police do.
No, exactly. And what I find really disappointing is that there's always that element of cynicism that, all right, I run a business. You're a business person, but actually, we give so much for free, and we deliver so much to support former police officers. My wife goes bonkers because I spend so much time doing other things and not concentrating on business. But that's the way that I am, and that's the way I was in the police service. And I don't know what it is, but there are some senior managers who find it very difficult to come to terms with. They think that there is an edge, and there is no edge. No. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and if I offer it, I mean it. It's as simple as that. I'm not looking for anything in return. But your time at JP Morgan was fantastic, and as I say, well remembered by those who had the opportunity to visit you socially and within business. But you then moved to the bank. Oh, and by the way, let's go back a little bit. Whilst you're at JP Morgan, we have the biggest terror attack on mainland England, mainland UK, in our history. From a business continuity perspective, what was that like when the July 7th bombings took place?
Yeah, 7/7. So I just landed in Frankfurt, and Paul Escrit, has always been with me on the Crime Prevention Association, and in fact, we actually were cadets together. And he rang me. He said, "I think we've got a terrorist activity in London." So effectively, I turned things around, and you mentioned Frank was commander then, and James Hart was the commissioner, and so we created the sister banks, if you remember. So we had the sister banks calls going, and we were doing, and as you rightly say, biggest attack ever. We'd never experienced a series of attacks, and we sadly, I mean, this story I think is known, but probably not well known, but we lost a young person in Tavistock Square, and this young man, I think he was 23. He was actually on the King's Cross train. Yeah, got out without injury. Phones up. He was part of the investment bank, which was just off Ropemaker Street. Phoned up and said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm going to be a very dedicated young man, 23. I'm really sorry, I'm going to be late. There's an incident. I don't know what it is." He gets on the bus and gets killed on the bus. I mean, talking about bad luck. So we had that, but of course he was missing, and we were trying to collate that. And then Frank rang, and he said, "Are you coming back?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm." He said, "Well, James would like to meet you." He said, because he really wants to understand what we need to do to restore confidence in this business sector in the City of London. And I got back. I flew into Docklands, and we met that early evening. And I'd had the sister banks calls, and while I remember with James, I thought all the commissioners have been good. They've all got their own little different personalities. And I said, "James, you just got to put yourself on parade. You got to let the business sector know." Yeah, I said, "I think we should have a sister banks meeting, like 11 o'clock tomorrow morning." I said, "You personally, I think you should be at Liverpool Street Station, Square and Centre, as the commissioner for the city." And we did. He did that, and we had we actually held the sister banks meeting. And I remember it was during that period of time. Do you remember the old Blackberries? Yeah, and there was that issue about, are Blackberries safe? Are they not safe? Or not that? And I remember James, he had a paranoia about Blackberries, and we sat around the table at 10 Aldermanbury, and he says, "I want everybody's BlackBerry switched off." And we go, "Why?" He goes, "Because I do." And then we just laid it on the table what we thought needed to be done. And of course, the sister banks, was formed when we formed that in 1996. Very, very strong international presence, and real pressure from the states as to what we should and shouldn't do, but collectively it worked. So yeah, that was 7/7. And then of course, and then the other thing, of course, was we activated Project Griffin.
Yes,
so we
yeah.
And one of the things that, and I'm very pleased now that you've got the City Security Council, which do the high vis days, which we're doing with the Violence Against Women and Girls on Thursday, Friday nights. But one of the things I don't think people knew was that when law enforcement across London was getting tired, because sustainability, if you remember, and I remember, I think Mike Boron was assistant commissioner. He rang me up. He said, "Look, we've got to reduce the resources, but can you sustain the Griffin Guards?" Which was voluntary. With respect, the average men of the public can't differentiate sometimes between a private security and a police officer or special or volunteer. And actually it allowed, so we sustained the level of Griffin Guards whilst UK law enforcement reduced its level of police officers on the street, and then did it. And of course, then we had the 21/7, didn't we? The aborted attack in Mile End.
Yeah, I remember.
So so that's the impact there. So you got all the if you think about it, Paul, you got the Project Griffin initiative 2003. We commenced that, and then you've got the sister banks, and all the public-private sector pieces coming together with an open-minded approach from chief officers to say, we're going to share this stuff with you.
And they need to, because the police service isn't big enough anymore. There aren't enough cops, and they need the great initiatives that you've brought about to maintain public confidence, which is what the police are there for. It's to maintain that public confidence. But Griffin, is that still in being? That's still going?
Well, it pretty much in a different name. I mean, the Griffin Awareness Days got subsumed by ACT, yeah.
Yeah.
Albeit I'm still disappointed that ACT didn't do a specialised one just for security guards. And now you've got effectively the high vis days that are operated in the city, and we're looking to transport elsewhere across the country are Griffin in name. In fact, I think across the world it still exists. I know. I think I may have told you the story, but if you look at Shield in New York,
yeah,
that's Griffin. That's Griffin. James and I went to New York and saw Ray Kelly, who was the commissioner then. And I remember being in his office, and James and I are there. And Ray Kelly goes, I like it. He's got one of his lieutenants with him and everything. He said, we're going to do it. I said, okay. I said, fine, but that's great. I said, we only come here to give you a good working practice. And my another good friend of mine, the judge, was there as well. And he goes, but you weren't here. And I'm going to say I invented it, and I'm going to change the name, yeah. And so he goes, I go, that's fine, Ray. I just think it's a great initiative, because they had the OEM, the Office of Emergency Management, at that time, and so we get up to leave, and he goes, he gives me a pair of commissioner's cufflinks, yeah. I said, but Ray, I'm not here. You just said I'm not here. I've never been here, and you're gonna. He said, you came on another occasion. Take the cufflinks.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Little anecdotes, Paul.
So you moved to the Bank of England. What was that like working within the?
Yeah, interesting. I think people. I'm very happy you probed this. You got to remember, I had my heart attack in the April of 2007.
Yes.
And you can't keep up the pace of an international bank like JP Morgan. So I decided, but the Bank of England had actually been wanting me to go there 3 years before. Anyway, made the decision to leave JP, and the bank came on again. I remember John Footman, who unfortunately is not very well now at the moment, but his secretary, I think I actually was in Florence with Peter Clarke on a counter-terrorism thing with Sir David Vaness and Clarkey and me and some few others, and his secretary rang me up, and Sheila, and she said, John would like to see you. And I said, okay, why? She said, we'd just like to see you, Doc. I said, okay, well, I'll come. And I went in, and I said, John, he goes, would you reconsider? Would you think about coming to the bank? I said, well, actually, I've had the heart attack. And anyway, so the interview panel was exactly the same, right? Andrew Bailey, the now governor, interviewed me 2.5 years before when he was chief cashier, and he was still chief cashier. So it was the same three people. And the first question was, has anything changed since we saw you 3 years ago? I said, well, I've had a heart attack and I got an MBE, but apart from that, everything's pretty much the same. And they took me, but it was a good time, Paul, because it's an institution. And I saw Mervyn on day 2, and he comes in, and it's quite interesting, this. So he comes in, and Mervyn holds my hand and shakes my hand with his entourage of personal private secretaries, etc. He took notes of everything. He said, we're so pleased you're here, Don. Yeah. And I'll give you a sequel to that. So, but they wanted to change, and it was a good time to change, because I think it was a last time of the full paid pension. So, people could leave at early 50s and effectively get their 60 plus pension. So, and they wanted to change. So, and I'm pretty good at change management. So, yeah, it's good. And then I was lucky enough I became chairman of the global heads of central bank security, and which was predominantly Five Eyes. Well, not actually all Five Eyes. It was Canada, America, and mainly Europe. And during my 2 years of tenure, I managed to bring Australia, Singapore, and South Africa into that group as well. So, which gave me again great international reach. So, yeah, that was good, and also put the Bank of England on as a marker, working with the European Bank as well. So, from a security perspective, yeah, just same ethics as what Mum told me to do, Paul. Just work hard.
Fantastic. And we spoke earlier on about the institute that you're involved in and the pro bono stuff. How did that all come about?
Yeah, the Chartered Schooling Professional, which I'm passionate. When I was mastering of the Westfield Company Schooling Professionals in 2010, I had 5 objectives, and one was to professionalise our industry, and that's where we got Royal Charter for the Westfield Company, and along with Peter French, Mike Bluestone, Alison Wakefield, names you know, Di Thomas, we created the Chartered Schooling Professional, which is now solid, square and centre. And the institute were the management machine behind it. I think we're just, by the time we have the dinner in September, we'll have 300 members. And the ultimate goal, Paul, for that is that if you want a senior position within security, at the moment it's like a CSYP would be welcomed, but in a couple of years' time it will be CSYP you have to have. Yeah. And then we did the Griffin, and then I was at the bank at the time for the Olympic. Remember the disturbances, the riots, whatever you want to call them, in October 2011, which weren't particularly well policed, but they weren't particularly well communicated. Janet Williams was the DAC in charge of CT for the Olympics.
Yep.
And Janet came to a meeting at the Bank of England with myself and Sir David, and basically said, look, can we do an enhanced Griffin? So she said, we need to get a better communications. And Janet, that was always a big supporter of what we did. And so we created the CSSC, the Cross Sector Safety and Communication Initiative, which is now seen as the communications vehicle. For the Olympics, we had 24 industry sector leads. It was pretty rough and ready. And obviously, Alaric Bonson was the chief superintendent lead for us, and it worked very well during the Olympics. And Chris Allison, and they shared a lot of stuff with us. Yeah. And CSSC now has got in excess of 4,000 industry sector leads across the country. We've followed the ROCU, so we got 8 regional chairs. We can get a message out. The straplines never change. Our sponsors were sadly James Brokenshire, who died last year, the MP, really nice man, Sir David, Janet and me. And now we can get, and the straplines never change. Only bit of change. We used to say fast time, whereas now we say timely, accurate and authoritative, all the CSC messages. And we can get, our reach is 15 million people in 20 minutes.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And then, so from that, and then can I just talk about the Violence Against Women and Girls piece?
You talk about everything, whatever you want to talk about. This is your moment, sir. So you please do.
All right. So we've established the principle of partnership. I think there are still some forces across the country who don't understand sharing and trust and that, and also the constant rotation at the top of the house of British policing doesn't help. Who is this Don Randal? It takes 3 months to get in the diary. It then takes them 3 months to really, well, do I like him? Don't I like him? And then they're gone.
Yeah. You start all over.
Yeah. And that's you got to respect people's career aspirations, but it does make things difficult. So it was in September 22, following 7/7, and Cress was the commissioner. She went, it's a step change. Yeah. And if you remember, it was similar. It's almost the same time as Grenfell, which is 7 years anniversary now, if you can put an anniversary on a tragedy. So Lucy was DAXO, taken over from Janet and others, and we caused the step change summit at the Guildhall, which went down very well. And also we had Manchester, of course, as well, all at the same time. So in September 22, Lucy, now wearing a chief BTP hat, rang me up and said, look, we've got a real issue about sexual crime, violence, harassment on the rail networks. Could you think about organising a conference for us, again, like you did for the step change? I said, yeah, of course. We had a meeting, a great deal of respect for Lucy, and Paul Crowther, my close friend, was a previous chief. And so we held a meeting. I had a meeting of about 8-9 people, and we talked about it. We talked about violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. And as we were leaving the meeting, there was a young person, young 24, 25, who worked for Safer Business Network. And as she stood up and went out, and she said, I've been sexually assaulted, sexually harassed, and spiked on 3 different occasions. And it stopped me in my tracks, Paul. And I went, oh, okay. And that was the motivation for what we're now doing, what we now call Prevent, Morgue and DA. So we held a conference in the Guildhall in February 23. Well attended, 120 people. Angela McLaren just stepped down for ill health from the city. Lucy was there, and we had the chief executive of the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse, and we were real good. And we actually had a male person who'd been abused, and female, many examples. And so we formed a committee, and started to grow, and I got the traction for this, and it's more horrendous than you realise. I mean, it's really, really bad stuff. And the city police work closely with the city, closely with Paul Fennell, who's acting ACC in BTP, former Hampshire, has done a lot on VAUG over the years. Great person. And with the Met, with Helen Millichap and her team. And I asked the incoming Lady Mayoress, for a mutual friend, Elizabeth Manelli, whether she would consider being, at that stage, one of our ambassadors. And where the vision was, Paul, was that during Michael Manelli's year of office, subject to election, which he was, that we run, because the city's great at pioneering stuff, but it needs Big Brother on the outside to be supportive. And the objective was we look at all the various initiatives around the country, pull them into the city with the corporation, and do this. And so I actually spoke to Michael, and I spoke to Paul Betts, the Assistant Commissioner of the city, and said, look, this is what I want to do. You know, this means you might get a spike in crime because we're telling people we want to prevent it, but, you know, you'll get the spike. And both have said, Michael said, that's fine, we can live with that. And one of Michael's year of office campaigns was to invite younger people into the city to work, and you don't have to go just to Oxford or Cambridge to work in the city. So it actually tied in quite nicely. And so we started to grow, and I asked Elizabeth Manelli if she'd change her title from ambassador to patron. She agreed. She looked at me a bit quizzically and said, what's the difference? Because she's Elizabeth, lovely person, comes from a Bavarian born. I asked Ian Dyson to be one of our ambassadors, former commissioner, and a lady called Sarah Cork. And we built what we call the consortium, and went to the corporation. I sit on the violent crime subcommittee, wearing my crime prevention hat, and we reintroduced taxi marshalling at Liverpool Street Station on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. High level stats, only because I've just seen the progress report. We started out on the 2nd of November. We facilitated in excess of 8,500 journeys, 14,000 people, 49% female, and 29% of that 49 were lone females. And we've done both quantitative and qualitative data, and we get some amazing comments back about people actually saying, I don't hail a cab on the street, I go to Liverpool Street because I know the marshals will do it. An interesting stat, Paul, we continued it after Christmas, yeah, and the footfall's the same, yeah. The condition of the passengers slightly different to pre-Christmas, but you know, and we work with the city police, or op reframe, so that we've now got. We launched on Tuesday, number 1 Lombard Street, the restaurant, the iconic restaurant next thing. So Soren, the owner, and Elliot, the general manager, they are now a safe haven. That's another thing we've introduced, Paul, and an ask around your location. You wouldn't have thought that somewhere like number 1 Lombard Street would engage with that. The Ned's going to come on board, Faulkner and Mace are coming on board. So Safe Havens is another initiative where you know, you feel uncomfortable, and you know, you just want to maybe charge your phone or just go somewhere where the security people are trained. So it's okay, you know, charge your phone, ring home, get a taxi. So we've got 10 core initiatives, and we've got 11 subsidiary initiatives, and we've only been going 6 months. So So that was it's all the same. It's like a griffin again, but in a different area.
Yeah.
Because what's the stat that someone quoted to me? 96% of all females between the ages of 18 and 24 have been either sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. That's and there's a lovely lady, the professor of criminology at the City University, and a lady called Catherine Holly, German nature. She's actually did Satira, you know, how they did the national policing policy on rape victims.
Yep.
And she is the government's go-to person for rape. And she says a very wise thing. She said, Don, you're doing great stuff, you know, but until you deal with the perpetrators, you'll always have victims. That's a little bit more difficult, but we're moving that way as well. So the objective, Paul, was for Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls DA, a year, test all the models, work out what works best, and then lift it up. And our motto, our strapline is "Our Safer City," but it's not "Our Safer City of London," it's "Our Safer City." So you can pick it up, go to Newcastle and go, here you go. Do you like that? Our Safer City. It doesn't matter. So that's the ultimate objective. It's almost like we did with Griffin, where we took Griffin across the country, then Griffin across the world. Same principle.
But I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I hope these great places take it on. The world has changed dramatically. We were talking earlier on about somebody that I interviewed from the music industry, where, you know, 50 years ago, music was so much different. But I do think that the social media, which we're doing now, and I believe that the music industry have got a lot to answer for when it comes to violence against women and girls, because they normalise the sexual behaviour. The lyrics and the actual content has just made it's very divisive, and it makes it almost acceptable that girls are going to engage in certain things, and the boys can treat girls or men can treat women in a particular way. And I think that there needs to be a step change around some of that as well.
I think there's the two. I don't disagree with you. The two areas we've got at the moment, and we've got to start putting this into a business model. We're getting pocket funding at the moment, which is supporting some of it, but we're trying to get some of the big organisations on to be supportive. But the two audiences we've got to do, and this is where I think it backs into what you're saying. One is to let men and women know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. That's the first thing. And then the next thing is to let them know what we're doing to be supportive to them.
Yeah. Safe
havens, taxi marshalling, spiking, bystander intervention, all these other initiatives. So there are the challenges. And, you know, I think the example I use, Paul, 5 years ago, wolf whistle was seen as funny. Yeah. Whereas a wolf whistle now is seen as offensive. Yes. We've got the over touchy feely come the end of a drinks evening is not acceptable anymore. Yeah. I was with someone yesterday who said there was a select committee, a government select committee to report on sexual harassment in the workplace, and the figures were quite horrendous, and, you know, all being resolved through NDAs and compromise agreements, and what is the true position. So, you know, I think it's a huge area. But if we can get, and this is why I'm very happy to talk with you, because the more we can push this out there and let people know that it's unacceptable, let people know. I mean, and this stat is wrong, isn't it? But allegedly only 1 in 5 rapes are reported. Yeah. You look at domestic abuse, everybody thinks it's violence, but it can be social, it can be financial, it can be manipulative. You know, EastEnders have done a bit on domestic abuse, you know, where the Indian lady was just basically contained and not allowed to do anything. And we got to get this stuff out there. So that's why, but it's not an easy challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge, Paul.
I think it's brilliant, and you're quite right. The coercive and controlling element of domestic abuse is underrepresented by the media. It all boils down to a fight, but it's not. It's that control over where they go, where your partner goes, what monies they have to spend, what the children are doing. It's that whole piece. But it's absolutely fascinating what you're doing. And if there's anything I can do, there are 98 countries that listen to this. So this message will go all over. So, but if there's anything I can do, Don, just let me know, and I will gladly help.
That's very kind, Paul. What I do is we put the mayoral, the London, the Lord Mayor mayoral term is the second Saturday in November to the second Saturday in November. So it'll probably take us to probably the first quarter 2025 to really congest all of this and say that's working and this is working. It's like people talk about spiking, Paul. People say, why don't you just put a bit, we got beer mats, the old fashioned, what they call them now, coasters now, they don't call them beer mats anymore, do they? But you can't, because you look at a glass, a glass can be a wine glass, or it can be a cocktail glass, or it could be a tall glass, it's not as easy as people say. So that's why we really, really pushing. I know it's the Ask for Angela. I mean, we've doubled the number of locations for Ask for Angela in the city, but even then I was talking to Patrick Holdaway the other day, who's the national lead on the National Business Crime Centre, and they've got safer places and we've got safe havens, but there's a difference between the safe places and those safe havens. And we I just said to Paul, but I'm sorry to Patrick, we've got to try and find a way of unconfusing for the members of the public so they know what the difference is and where they are. But we'll get there. It'll take the pilot we'll have enough. I'm already confident we'll have enough data out of the pilot to say this works, this needs more work. And if I may, I'll use your vehicle to maybe come back and talk another time, or just feed some stuff into you, Paul.
Please do. And if it's a 2-minute message that you want to get out, then that's what we can do. I put it out on a short, and it goes all over the place. So no, I'm more than happy to help where I can. But look, this is a silly question because Don Randall's never going to pack up. But what's happening with Don? What does the future look like for Don?
Yeah, okay. So, we moved to Colchester 10, 11 years ago. We were very privileged to have a lovely home. We got our two boys. Boys, by the way, have got 4 legs and a tail. So I think, I've been through my fair share of physicals. I had prostate cancer this time last year. In fact, I'm getting my next oncology result in 20 minutes time, which I'm pretty confident will be negative. I think providing you can physically, Angie's mum is 96 now and getting a little bit more frail. So, when you look at the next 3 to 5 years, the boys are 14 and 13 now. That's the dogs, Buddy Junior. Angie's mum, she maybe 2 more years or whatever. So, domestically the ties. I personally think I'm 73 now, Paul, but I think when you get over 80, people, at 73, they think you're 63. Yeah. But when you're 80, they don't think you're 23. So I think I sort of, and you're not the first person to say that, because they go like crime prevention, who's going to do this afterwards? So, but there's some good people in the wings who can take over various bits as we go forward, and had really good conversations recently. You'll remember Mike McDonough.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Mike and I are very close, 10, 12 years younger, a lot of energy, those, we talk about Ken. I've taken Ken as one of my deputies on the Crime Prevention Association with Peter Lavery. So personally, I look in 5-year windows, and that 5-year window sometimes shifts a little bit. So it might be, but it's 5 today. Yes. So subject to good health and like your wife said to you when you're talking, why do we do this stuff? Because actually it's needed, and B, we enjoy it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also I think, professionally, a lot of, I do more advisory stuff these days but the key word is currency. If we look professionally, isn't it? Currency. And I'd like to think we're pretty current. Yeah. We might not be in the top 5% of knowledge, but we're in the top, 90% of knowledge, which helps our business, which allows us to do this. And also, I think, allows people like Lucy to ring up and say, Don, can you help me? And there's a lot of goodwill out there, Paul. We just got to find a way of harnessing it.
There is. And you talk about your pro bono stuff as well that you do. How does that work for you?
I only ever really reference that when someone asked me to do something, asked him and said, and you put the word pro bono down, and I still never know. I say to Angie, should it have a hyphen or no hyphen? And but you know, I think we just do it. I don't even reconcile it, and I get a little. I heard I saw a paper the other day about 3 tiers of, you know, you've got the first tier is law enforcement, the second tier is authority, and the third tier is us, the private sector. And are we doing what the first two should be doing? Yep. Yeah. Could we do it more? Yep. Is it right that we're doing what they are being paid to do? Well, as you rightly said almost at the start, that there aren't enough police officers, you know. Everything's stretched. I mean, you know, anything that gets a tag of difficulty gets given to the police to deal with, doesn't it? Yeah. So to answer your question, I think as long as we can, and it doesn't get it gets a little bit sometimes. My only frustration is the rotation at level. You know, we need a bit of stability. Just so we can talk to the same people and do it. But there's still, someone used an old-fashioned expression the other day about gripping something. Yeah, and to do what we do, you need someone on that law enforcement side who's prepared to grip it and do something with it.
Yeah, absolutely right. So, well, I've had a brilliant time chatting to you, Don. I hope that you've enjoyed your experience on this podcast today.
I really have.
But before I conclude this interview, I need to ask you if there's anything you'd like to add, alter, or correct in relation to the statement that you've made today. You remember those words, don't you, when you used to take those statements at the
Yeah. Actually, when we do the old vetting these days, I always put a question to vetting: is there anything that you feel would be detrimental to, you know, the organisation you're seeking to join? Which is the old DV question, isn't it? But no, I'm very happy, Paul. I'm very happy. I think. I haven't asked the people I've referenced if I can reference them, but I think they'd be quite pleased with the references I've made, Paul.
I think it's been a lovely conversation, and I know everyone comes on here thinking, you know, what is this all about? But it is a conversation. It's a conversation piece. It's not staged. We haven't discussed the questions or the answers or anything. It's just us talking in 2 rooms, but we could be in the same room in the same bar. And I hope at some point in the near future I get the opportunity to buy you a beer in London.
I look forward to that, Paul. Thanks for your time and thanks for inviting me. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And please send my regards to the McDevitt's and to Ken Stewart. And you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you.
I'll do that for you, buddy. See you soon.
Okay. God bless. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul.